Let's get our tools in order. I'm in an app right now called Cursor. Cursor has a free trial, but if you use it enough, it will eventually start asking for money. And Cursor is an AI code editor. What that means is that it's built to streamline the process of writing code with an AI model. So on the right-hand side here, we've got this chat panel, and this is how we'll prompt AI. And if I click around a little bit, there's a handful of models we can choose from. I've got Claude 3.7 Sonnet selected. And another tool we'll need to consider is which Windows desktop framework we're going to use. If you're going to build a Windows desktop app, there's a number of frameworks that'll help you do that. We're going to be using Tauri, and let's go ahead and recap on some of these tools. We're using an AI code editor called Cursor. Some alternatives are Windsurf, RuCode, and Klein. We're using an AI model called Claude. Some alternatives are Gemini and GPT. And we're using a Windows desktop framework called Tauri. Some alternatives are Electron, Qt, and Flutter. And I've noticed that there's pretty fierce debate online about which one of these is the best in each category. And it can kind of lead to like decision paralysis, where you feel like you need to research all of these different things and make the best decision before you can get started. But I want you to know that you could use any combination of any one of these alternatives, and the overall process that we're going to be following will remain exactly the same. Any one of these tools is totally fit to build our trade tool with. To get started with Tauri, we could totally ask Claude to whip us up a template, but the problem with that is that if it doesn't work, it's going to be pretty difficult to troubleshoot exactly where it went wrong. So I'm going to suggest we do one more thing without any help from AI, and that's to follow the Tauri quick start. So I'm here on Tauri's homepage. They've got a get started link, and this is the authoritative way to get started with Tauri. So this is just a smart thing for us to do. Scrolling down to prerequisites, system dependencies, Windows 7 and later, that's us. And there's a handful of things that they'd like us to download and install, starting with Microsoft C++ build tools. We can download and install that here. Next up is WebView 2. They'd like us to install the Evergreen Bootstrapper. Next up is Rust. We can download and install that here. And finally, we installed Node.js. We can skip this section on configuring for mobile targets since we're building a desktop app, not a mobile app. And there's even a troubleshooting section. And continuing on, they've got a PowerShell command that they'd like us to run. So let's go ahead and pull up our terminal and paste that in there. It wants a project name. We'll just say app. This is basically just a folder name. Identifier, we'll say chiseled course. Which language for the front end? We'll say TypeScript and JavaScript. Package manager, we'll do NPM. UI template is Svelte. UI flavor is TypeScript. And what that did is that gave us all of this source code to get us started. So let's keep cruising on this quick start. Start the development server. They'd like us to move into the app folder, install some dependencies, and then start up our app. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, that was our dependencies. Now let's run our app. And hey, just like that, we've got a running, working Windows desktop app. So this is great because it tells us that all those dependencies that we installed were all installed correctly. It tells us that the source code we got set up with is configured correctly. And instead of starting from scratch, we can adapt this quick start into our trade tool. It's going to be a great way to get started. And now that we've got some source code, let's also install some extensions. So we go to File, Preferences, Extensions. And if I click the recommended section here, we've got some options. We're going to pick up the Rust Analyzer and the Svelte for VS Code extensions. And this is going to make editing Rust files and Svelte files just a little bit better of an experience. And there's one more thing we need to install, and that's Git. Git is going to let us take checkpoints of our source code as we go. And it's also going to help us deploy our app to GitHub. So I'm here on Git's homepage. There's a download for Windows link. If you download and install that, then we'll be able to type git init and git add period. That says go ahead and start tracking all of these files for changes. And then if we want to make our first checkpoint, we'll say git commit -m and we'll say Tauri quick start done. And now if we screw something up and we need to go back to this moment in time, we can do so with Git. Time to make a prototype. Let's think back to our architecture diagram, and I'm going to suggest we make one change. Instead of having this hotkey feature where we press a hotkey and the item details are sent to the backend automatically, instead, let's just stick an input box on the front end, and we'll say item text goes here. This becomes provided item text. We'll connect this up. This one becomes return trade site filters. And we will come back and set up the hotkey feature later on, but for now, just for the sake of our prototype, this will let us keep things simple. And at this point, you might be wondering, what is item text and where does it come from? Well, Path of Exile has a built-in feature where we can get the text representation of any item just by hovering over it, pressing Ctrl+C, and the item text is put on our clipboard. Then we just Control V and we can take a look at it. We'll get into parsing all this stuff later on in the course, but for now, that's what it is and that's where it comes from. All right, it's time to put Claude to work. We're going to take our design and turn it into a step-by-step for Claude to follow in this prompt. It's going to be kind of a big one. So we'll say, hey Claude, I'm building a path of Exile to trade tool. I completed the tauri quickstart as a starting point. Could you adapt what we have into a prototype with the following flow? Step 1. User provides item text in an input on the front end. 2. Item text converted into trade site filters on the back end. 3. User selects which trade site filters they want on the front end. 4. User presses the search button on the front end. 5. POE2 trade site searched for selected filters on the back end. 6. Matching items returned to the front end. Okay, let's see what it comes up with. Here it's asking to run our app. I'm going to say no for now. So now we got to review some code. And you might be saying, dude, I don't know Svelte, I don't know TypeScript, and I don't know Rust. So how am I supposed to review this code? And the good news is, I don't think it matters. It'll help if you're already familiar with this stuff for sure. But the cool thing is, this is a way that you can jump in as a beginner and learn these programming languages over time. And this is nothing fancy. We're going to be looking at one small block of code at a time. We're going to figure out what that block of code is doing. And as we go, we're going to think about how all of these small blocks are connected. And keep in mind that when you're learning, you can ask your AI assistant to explain any piece of code that you're trying to make sense of. Just remember that AI can be wrong. So this can be a super helpful tool for learning, but just be ready to verify whatever answer you get. Okay, let's do this review. The first block of code that we're going to look at is this new function called parse item text. And you'll notice that it's using something called invoke. If we hover over that, it says sends a message to the back end. So we're sending item text from the front end to a function on the back end called parse item text. Sounds good? And we'll look at the next function, search items. This one is almost identical, also using invoke, but this time it's sending selected filters from the front end to a function on the back end called search trade site. So far, so good. Here's some helper functions, toggle filter and is filter selected. These red squiggles mean that we have some TypeScript errors. We're not going to sweat those for now. And here we're removing a lot of code. So we're removing a Vite logo, tauri logo, SvelteKit logo. And if you remember back to when we ran our tauri quickstart, this is what we saw. So we're adapting our tauri quickstart into our POE trade tool. Cool. And here we have an input element where we can put some item text. Next to that is a button, which when clicked will call that function that we looked at earlier, parse item text. So now we're getting an idea how all this stuff is wired together. So here's where we display and can select our trade site filters. Next to that is another button, which when clicked calls the other function we looked at together, search items. And finally, we display the search results. And the rest of the stuff in this file is kind of just style stuff. So like font size, font color, stuff like that. We'll make this pretty later, but for the sake of our prototype, we don't really care that much. And now let's take a look at our Rust backend. So we've got some more squiggles. If we hover over that, it says unused import. Imports and dependencies are something that current models kind of struggle with. So if our editor is saying we don't need these, I'm just going to delete them. And here we have our structs. So this is the shape of the objects that we're going to be working with. And it's decided on the name item filter. We've been calling them trade site filters throughout the course so far. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this real quick. And it might seem like a small thing, but updating the names as you go can go a long ways towards making this code more maintainable over time. And next up, we're going to look at this backend function parse item text. So we saw this referenced on the front end. We saw that we're sending item text from the front end to this function on the back end. And now we can see what it's doing. So it's going line by line, looking at that item text. And if it finds something like item level on a line, it will parse that line into a trade site filter for item level. And the same thing goes for rarity here as well. So we've got a bit of a starting point for parsing the item text. That's cool. And here's our other backend function, search trade site. We saw this one referenced in the front end as well. We've got another squiggle. This time it says unused variable filters. That's kind of suspicious. We're not even using the filters that we passed in here. And this says simulate a delay to mimic network request. So we're not even actually making a network request. We're not actually making a real call to the POE2 trade site. Instead, we're pausing the app for 1,000 milliseconds to simulate a network request and then returning back some dummy data called mock results. I think it's kind of silly to pause our application artificially, so I'm going to delete that. And the next thing that we do after this change is we'll wire this up to call the real POE2 trade site, but for now this is fine. And down here we can see our Rust run function. This is pretty close to the starting point for a Rust application. And if we hover over generate handler, it says creates a handler that allows commands to be called from JavaScript with invoke. Great, that's totally consistent with everything that we've seen so far and explains how all of this is glued up. This greet command is a holdover from our quickstart, so we're going to go ahead and remove that. And let's move over to our cargo file. The cargo file is all about managing Rust dependencies, and Claude thinks that we need to add 2 new dependencies. But when we were reviewing, we saw that we're not actually using request, and toke.io is just being used for that 1000 millisecond artificial pause, so we'll delete those. And finally, we'll take a look at this README file. So this one's kind of weird because we didn't ask for a README, we just asked for a prototype. And this is another quirk of some of the current models, is that they can be a little bit over eager. And so sometimes they'll recommend things that we didn't ask for. And in this case, we're just going to say reject file. All right, now let's run it. We'll move into the app folder and do npm run tauri dev. And would you look at that? We've got our running trade tool prototype. I happen to have some item text here. I'll paste that in. These are the boots that we've been working with so far. And we've got a handful of trade site filters. So it's got name twice here, and it looks like it didn't pick up our movement speed or the life regen. But this is absolutely incremental progress. This is cool. And then we'll click search trade site. We'll see that dummy data returned back. Cool. So this thing is pretty ugly and there's a few parsing issues, and it's not actually searching the real POE2 trade site. But other than that, not bad. We had to fix a few minor things, but overall, Claude has been a huge help. So I'm going to go ahead and make another Git checkpoint, and we'll call this one prototype done. And now we'll move on to making it search the trade site for real.